Hello everyone, today I want to show you how to make this Chinese dovetail plane. I got the idea for this plane from watching a video of a Chinese master making a plane similar to this one. So if you want to see the reference video, go and follow the link in the description. So he used this plane plus this short saw here, and he was able to make sliding dovetails either with the grain or across the grain. So hopefully next video I'll show you how to make this little short saw. But today I'm going to show you how to make this sliding dovetail plane. To make the blade for this dovetail plane, I started off with just a regular plain blade. I had this thing in the vise, and I sort of sliced this apart, and I sort of put a clamp here as a heat sink. It may not be necessary. I don't feel like the heat of cutting this part really raised that much. I also cut the back apart here, and once this thing was taken apart, the angle here is set using my bevel gauge, which is set to 8 degrees. And this 8-degree bevel gauge, I have a dovetail gauge here that I've made a long time ago. And if you're interested in this dovetail gauge, go ahead and follow the link in the description. Once I had this, I was able to slowly ground the edge here down to the proper angle. And the back of it, I had to make sure that this gets ground sort of in a parallel fashion as well. So this will be parallel to the edge here. And the back of it, I kind of put it into an angle like this so that when I'm hitting it from back here, the force of it is sort of aligned in the middle. So the last thing I did to prepare this blade is remove the burrs on as much as I can on the surfaces. So I was making sure that nobody was in front of the belt sander as I was using it. I didn't have a piece of wood thick enough for the width of blade I was using, so I had to laminate a piece of 1/4 inch thick walnut with a piece of 7/8 inch thick beech. After trimming the width down to size, I decided to go ahead and mark the position of all the fence retaining screw and the fence retaining nut. Now the Chinese master marked these holes and drilled them out and made the mortars after he first cut the fence off. I found his method inefficient because he had to tack the fence back on with glue and then do all the marking, whereas I think it's much easier to do all the hardware fitting while the piece is still square. The Chinese master used prefabricated steel square nuts that looked like to be about 3/4 inch by 3/4 inch. I made my square nut from a brass bar because apparently in America square nuts are very expensive. I'm using the square head of a multi-square to help me guide the drill as well as the tap because the mortars I made is a fairly tight fit. Drilling and tapping brass is fairly straightforward. Just remember a bit of cutting oil goes a long way. After fitting the hardware, I then set my table saw to approximately 8 degrees and did a test cut. Alright, so as you saw that, as careful as I was, I forgot to set to lock the fence. So as I was pushing this, the thing moved this way. So as you can see, it's no longer a straight line. But fortunately for me, it cut into this piece, which is going to be the fence, and not into the body piece. So I think I can salvage this. I'm really on edge for this cut. So just finished planing this, and it lines up at about 8 degrees, or at least the same as this guy here. And when I put it up to here, I don't know if you can see it, but this corner here, the inner corner here, is a little bit high. I'm going to plane that down as well. Alright, so after a little bit of excitement, I was able to get these two angles to match up. They're both at the same 8 degrees. And I also check to make sure that the angle is correct by putting it back together, and this thing is at a 90-degree angle. So that tells me these two angles are parallel, or the same. So the fence is pretty much finished. As you can see, it's supposed to slide up and down. So what I need to do is elongate this hole a bit so that this thing can then slide. So I made a line here where the blade is going to rest. And this angle here is approximately 50 degrees. So to determine where the other line is supposed to be, you can ignore that line. That's actually just an estimate line. I put the blade on like this, and the wedge like this. Not estimate, but simply draw a line of where approximately the other line should be. So my estimate line and the actual line is actually pretty close. To determine where the area for the shaving should come out, I'm about, I don't know, a 1/4 inch from the bottom here. And then make just a reference mark here. I then mark the depth of the blade on both sides so I know how deep to cut the mouth of the plane. To make the throat for the plane, I'm using a dime to trace out a circle that's probably a little bit under 2 centimeters. This little triangular shape, it's something that's very Chinese. It can be used as a little nook to hook your thumb onto it so that you can operate the plane with 2 hands, but generally it's just decorative because this plane is easily used with just 1 hand. I then finished shaping the plane using a series of chisels, rasps, files, and sandpaper. So the minimum opening of this dovetail plane is going to be 3 millimeters. And that means anything that hangs off the back here is unnecessary. So I'm just gonna plane this down so that when there is set to the minimum opening, this side is flush. I made the wedge from a piece of scrap cherry, and I made it oversized so that I can plane it down. The finish I used for this plane is a couple of coats of linseed oil, and once that oil was dried, I went to the more traditional Chinese method of using beeswax. And this method is very straightforward. It involves warming up the beeswax and then applying it onto the piece of wood. And buff the wax until it feels nice and smooth. Most of the wax should be removed. If it feels like wax paper, then there is too much wax still left on the piece of wood.